What's up, y'all? It's time for another episode of Raw and Uncut with Muriel. And as you may already know, I am answering questions and prompts that were given to me via different social media platforms. And today's prompt is managing boundaries with uncooperative people who you want to keep in your life. So this is a really good one. This person didn't tell me if the uncooperative person is an adult or a child or a teenager, their relative or what. So I don't have any specific context, but I'm going to talk for the next 30 minutes. Let me set my timer about this particular topic. So I'm going to start my timer now. And this is called Raw and Uncut for a reason. This is live. There's no editing that's going to happen. I don't have any special digital tricks, any sound effects. It's just me, just Muriel. And to give you some background for those who don't know me, I am trained in somatic psychotherapy. I'm a licensed insurance broker, and I'm just a person who's curious about life, who's interested in learning about human behavior, because I am a human and I interact with humans regularly. So I definitely have a passion for talking about this stuff. So thank you for those who send me these questions. Okay, so managing boundaries with uncooperative people you want to keep in your life. So this is a good one. Boundaries are something that come up for most people, I would say. A lot of us never really get taught how to, one, become aware and be aware and conscious of what our boundaries are, and two, be able to communicate them effectively. So for uncooperative people, I mean, it definitely depends on if you have a choice to interact with this person or not. Like if they're a coworker, if they're a boss, if they're your family member, if they're, your child, that's going to make a big difference. So I'll try to speak broadly and then, hit on specific dynamics, specific interpersonal dynamics. So like I said, number one, know what your boundaries are. Number two, be able to communicate them effectively. And effectively doesn't mean that there's a specific blueprint, because it doesn't matter if you think you're communicating effectively if that person isn't able to receive what you're saying. So you have to consider your audience. For those of you who are writers, for those of you who are actors, who create content for people, that one of the first things to do is to consider who you're writing for, who is your target market, who is your audience. This is definitely true in general when you're communicating in general. We make a lot of assumptions about, oh, well, I would have done this. If somebody told me this, I would have responded this way. Well, that person isn't you. So we need to stop having an expectation around how somebody is going to act or how somebody should respond based off of yourself and your behavior, because we need to honor people's full humanity and recognize that their experience and their perception is going to be different. So the next step I would say the second step is to recognize who that person is, who the uncooperative person is, where they're at in their level of consciousness and their level of emotional intelligence, and what type of communication they are capable of receiving, and what type of communication turns them off, makes them shut down, makes them get defensive, makes them change the subject, whatever it is. And then, try to meet them where they're at the best you can. We don't have control over other people, what they do, say, think. We do not have control over that. The only thing we have control over is what we do, what we say, what we think, and how we respond, right? So in terms of managing boundaries, you can do your best to set clear boundaries right? So if it's a physical boundary or it's an emotional boundary, don't talk to me in this way. It impacts me in this way. And then as best as you can, make a specific request. Instead, do this, right? So instead of, you know, telling me about me, instead of telling me what you think I think, right, which is a form of projection, instead ask me. My request is that you ask me how I feel or ask me what I think about something instead of just making an assumption and putting words in my mouth, right? So first step, know what your boundaries are, be able to communicate them effectively. Second step, to be able to communicate effectively, you need to know how the person or people you're communicating with, how they are able to receive, right? Managing boundaries with uncooperative people. So I wish I could ask this person what they meant about uncooperative, right? Because why is there an expectation that this person needs to be cooperative with you? Are you their boss? Is it like a professional setting where you're managing them and there is like a formal expectation, or is it your child where they need to be cooperative, or is it like a group of people that you work with where there has to be some sort of cooperative collaboration? If the answer is yes, I'll speak in terms of that, because those are situations where I could see cooperation would need to be expected. So if they're being uncooperative and in relationship to boundaries, so they're being uncooperative in a way that's somehow crossing your boundaries, there's several things to navigate here. Depending on the situation, I'm wondering, I have a question about your physical and emotional safety, your economic safety. So if you were to confront this person, would it be a threat to your job? Would it be a threat to your physical or emotional safety? Would you be setting yourself? What are the pros and cons? Is it worth it to confront this person based on the risk? Are you risking your job? Are you risking your safety? Are you risking a relationship with an important family member? And maybe it's worth the risk, because if you do not speak up and confront this person to set a clear, strong boundary, then it'll actually be more threatening to your relationship than if you were, and there would be some sort of resolution and reconciliation. So definitely, I would say the next step is to assess the risk. If based off of your assessment, you find that it's safe enough, I would then approach them from a place of giving them enough power to consent to having the conversation, instead of just putting the conversation on them because you need it. And it's something, it's just something that you need and you feel needs to happen and is the best way to move forward. So what I usually do is say something like, hey, I'd like to have a conversation, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to set aside maybe 30 minutes to an hour to have a conversation about how we communicate with each other, sometime within the next week. Does that sound okay for you? Right? So this is, not only are you getting their consent, when we do that, that's what we call in my profession trauma informed, right? Because you're not putting them in a place to be defensive. They get to say yes or no. And I haven't had a situation where somebody just says no. But most likely they're going to say yes. And when they consent, then they've got some ownership over the conversation, and that allows for space for them not to be so boundaried or so resistant maybe to receiving what you have to say, because they've already consented to it. They've already, said yes to allowing it in. So ask them for consent to have the conversation, and then set a clear day and time. Like, don't just say, oh yeah, we'll connect with each other tomorrow, or I'll connect with you next week. No, be specific, because if neither of you follows up to get to the specific, which will take another a whole nother check-in, which is completely unnecessary, in my opinion, then one of you is going to be in a place of resentment, and it's probably going to be you, the one who initiated it. So at that time that you get consent, get a verbal agreement to meet at a specific day and time for a specific time range. So 30 minutes to an hour. So both of you know what to expect, but especially the person who you're going to have this potentially difficult conversation with knows what to expect, right? And they're not just going to get hounded on for hours, right? And you may consider even the space, the location of where you are. So are you in neutral territory? Are you going to have it in your home, their home? Are you going to have it in, outside? Sometimes the difference between having a difficult conversation inside or outside makes a huge difference, because the tension isn't stagnant in one room. When you're outside, it can flow, the wind can flow. You can kind of allow for some distractions when you have those pause moments to allow for the processing, to look at a bird. It's just more comfortable and calming. I love having difficult conversations outside. If that's not an option, then consider it. Can you have it in a common space instead of, if it's in a professional setting, instead of having it in one of y'all's offices, go to a conference room, right? Where there's not so much of a power differential. Likely it has nothing to do with you, right? So I would say even go back to step one would be, don't take that shit personally. It's not about you. I can damn near guarantee you it's not about you. So recognize that whatever they're carrying is about their stuff, whatever they're going through currently. It literally could be anything. It could be their personal or ancestral stuff that they're holding that may not even belong to them, but they've somehow internalized it and are projecting it onto you, and it's manifesting in the form of being uncooperative. So you want to keep this person in your life. So I would say, in that case, you get their consent to have the hard conversation. Now, once you've set it up and it's come around, be clear about what your intentions are and communicate that at the beginning of the meeting. Don't just go into it, right? So I actually have a template for this, and it basically says state there. It's AEIOU. I don't remember it, but I'll actually send this to you, the person who asked me this question, and I'll put it in the description once this is finished. But off the top of my head, the parts that I do remember, I know you state your intention. I stands for intention. So my intention for us, having this heart to heart is, I've noticed that the past few times that we've communicated, I felt, a little uneasy or just uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily feel understood. And I imagine that you don't feel understood either. So I'd like to have a conversation about how we can communicate better with each other and what each of us needs to feel heard and understood. And feel valued, right? Because when somebody's uncooperative, it's probably because they either don't feel heard or understood, they feel undervalued, or their values aren't matching yours. Or if the values are matching yours, they just have a different way of solving the particular problem or addressing or engaging with that particular value. And so once you identify where the tension is, where the difference is, then you can kind of negotiate from a conscious place, like, oh, you were trying to come at this value through this avenue, and I was actually coming over here, and that's why we're butting heads. So maybe since my skill is networking and your skill is marketing, then maybe we can just leverage those skills because we both share this same value of connecting and making sure that our community has this particular set of knowledge, right? So being clear about your intention, state your fears, okay? I'm afraid that if I speak my truth, that you're going to shut down, you're going to walk away, and you're either going to feel guilty and just shut down, or you're going to blame or shame me for being too sensitive, and we're just not going to get anywhere. And I really want to stay in connection. I want to be in relationship with you. I really value this relationship. And I want to be in connection, but I'm afraid that, in my attempt to stay in connection by setting a clear boundary, that you're just gonna, peace out on me and abandon me. And I don't want that to happen. Right. So there's the vulnerability that comes in. And the expectation is that they're able to say this as well. They're able to speak their fear. They're able to speak their intention. For them to be able to do that, when you set the meeting before it happens, there needs to be some amount of clarity for them to give informed consent about what the meeting is about. So when I modeled that earlier, I want to have a conversation about how we can communicate with each other effectively. Then they'll kind of have some idea. If you want to go more into detail so they can plan a little bit better, you can, depending on the personality. If you think that'll help. For some people, it just makes them more defensive if they have more time to plan. So you may not want to do that. It just kind of depends on the person. So state your fears, state your intention, be clear about what you're requesting, right? So you're going to set the boundary, but you also need to have a request. Instead of this, do this. You don't want to just say, don't do this, I don't like this. You want to give an alternative that actually works so they know what to do. This is true for anybody of any age. I feel like a lot of people know this in terms of communicating, correcting children, uncooperative children, but it's the exact same with adults. It doesn't change. Okay. So, like when we say for a child, well, you can be angry, but you can't hit me. Instead of hitting me, use your words. What are you angry about? Say, well, I'm angry that you didn't let me get ice cream. Okay, cool. You're allowed to be angry. Thank you for telling me. Boom, that's it, right? So for adults, it's the same thing. You can feel upset, but you don't get to be, I don't want you to be, I don't want you to be defensive, or I don't want you, what's something more specific? I don't want you, you don't get to like put me down. You don't get to shame me, right? You don't get to tell me that, I'm incorrect and not value my input. So what do you need to feel validated? What do you need to feel heard? Do you need me to not speak first and you share your opinion and your experience and your values first, and then I follow up? Right? Is that what you need? And then do you need me to reflect what you just said back so you know that I heard you? Because I can do that. So that's the next step. You agree to what you're going to commit to doing moving forward, both of you or all of you, if it's more than two people involved. Make an agreement about what you're both going to commit to do moving forward. And you may, if you have times, again, set a timer. You set a time limit. So there needs to be a timekeeper, and it should be the person who called the meeting, who initiated it, to make sure you're not monopolizing this person's time. But if there's time, then you can talk about, well, how do we hold each other accountable? How do we hold ourselves accountable? And how do we hold each other accountable to what we're agreeing on today? Because I don't want it to be a situation where you ask me for a particular style of communication and then I slip off. I do it for like a week, but then I slip off and I go back into my own thing. So to hold me accountable, feel free to send me an email, a text message, or to talk to me in person, like, hey, and just give me a nudge. Hey, remember that agreement? I've noticed that, that hasn't been happening lately. Can we make sure that we stick to that? Right? So you be accountable first, and then make an agreement with them. How are they willing to be held accountable? Asking them, how do you want to be held accountable? Right? And hopefully they'll be able to communicate. They'll be able to tell you how to communicate with them in a way that they can receive. Now, all of this depends on the level of consciousness and the level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness this person has. If they don't have the level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness needed to have these intentional conversations, then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to put in the emotional labor to teach this person this stuff? Does it make sense? Is it even appropriate given our roles in each other's lives? Or is that too much of a self-sacrifice right now? Can I just hold the intention to stay in connection with them, but allow them to mature at their own rate while I meet them where they're at and not expect anything, too far beyond that, because that would be setting myself up for failure and disappointment, right? So from that perspective, there's a place of coming from acceptance, a place of acceptance, meeting that person where they're at and accepting them for where they're at, right? That can be super, super challenging, particularly if, like, the person who asked this question said, I imagine that they're crossing your boundaries, because you said, how do you set boundaries with uncooperative people that you want to stay in, that you want to keep in your life? Oh no, you said, how do you manage boundaries, right? So if you're trying to manage boundaries and this person isn't even in the mindset to be able to do that, then you may have to set some physical boundaries as far as limiting the amount of time you spend with this person, but recognizing you want to keep them in your life. So, the saying, like, I don't remember the saying, but maybe it'll come to my mind. But, in doses, like, I can be around this person in doses. So maybe you spend like an hour, you go for a lunch, you go for a meal, and that's it. There are particular subjects that are off limits for yourself, for your own mental health, for your own happiness, for your own boundaries. Knowing that where they're at, they're not going to be able to have a real conversation about anything. From there, if that person lives with you, then you've got to get creative on around how you set that physical boundary. So you might, spend quality time with them doing a particular activity. Maybe it's playing a game, watching TV, cooking in the kitchen, something that doesn't involve the trigger point. And then beyond that, you kind of just, you don't engage in any deeper than that for now, until you start to see that they're gaining the emotional intelligence and level of consciousness that is needed to have the harder conversation. And the way that they gain that is through experience and observation. So you still do you, right? You still be the conscious person that you are. You still be the curious person that you are. You may ask them, a question that's not going to be triggering, but help them think. It all depends on how much emotional labor and how invested you are in, supporting this person's process. But yeah, and if they're your partner that you literally are sleeping beside on a daily basis, then go to couples therapy, please. There's way too much for me to try to get into to cover like couple dynamics. But as far as couples, like, most likely y'all trigger each other. If either of you have trauma, the whole point of being in relationship is to touch on that trauma and heal it with that person. So most likely you're going to attract somebody that is at least somewhat triggering or resembling of some sort of childhood or more recent trauma. And they'll either help you heal by giving you whatever need that wasn't met. Maybe there was a childhood wound or a childhood need for nurturing or whatever that you never got from a particular parent. Maybe they'll give you that and help your inner child heal, or they're going to perpetuate your wound. And that's much deeper work, and something that I highly encourage you to work out in a couples therapy. Vet 2 to 3 therapists, choose one that you resonate with, that both of you resonate with. If you're in a poly relationship, that, whatever your configuration, y'all resonate with, and go to sessions. The majority of couples wait till it's too late. when they go to couples therapy. A lot of when I worked with couples, like a lot of times they just came to therapy to break up. And I've been in couples therapy as the client myself. And I don't think we went in too late, but it was definitely like, for me, it was more of like, okay, I just need the confirmation that this is not going to be sustainable for me. And I got that in couples therapy. I don't think I would have gotten that if we didn't have that third party there holding space and facilitating the space for me to have that confident realization, like, Muriel, stop kidding yourself. This is not working. Right. So, and just to be able to be in my truth. So that's pretty much it for that topic. Thank you for asking that question. I hope my response is helpful. If you have any clarifying questions that you'd like me to do another 30-minute segment on, if you'd like to give me some more specifics, feel free to do that in any of my social media platforms or in the chat below. And thank you for tuning in. Peace.